right, so I want to cover this next bit, and I want to be a little bit jovial about it because it's kind of funny. This feels more like a death rattle than it does an actual critique of a movement. But first, I want to go ahead and get fan art out of the way because a Nubian has graced us with a hammer. Hammer of Aspects, a hammer containing the ability to split its wielder into 4. The gems of the hammer reflect the original, and the 3 aspects are born from the hammer's power. When wielded by Suris, it creates Suris, Sisis, and Ruris. Designs for Sisis and Ruris made by Stuff. I don't know who came up with Suris. We'll now proceed to make a magic card for this hammer. And for that one, we have the Hammer of the Aspects magic card. Okay, you know what? That's kind of cool. I'm not even gonna lie. Having more lore like that, I'm not even gonna hate it. As always, thank you all for your fan art submissions. If you want your fan art to be shown in a future video, the best way to do so is to drop it into the fan art section of the Discord. With that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the video that I want to cover right now. This is from Think Before You Sleep, who has almost 1 million subscribers. And it's called Why the LGBT Movement is Failing. And, they start out with a picture of what looks like a drag queen in Skag? I don't know. We'll see what we get out of this.
Some carry hate. We carry the largest trans pride flag to ever be flown in a national park and unfurled it on the side of El Cap to prove a point, that trans is natural.
Please, tell me what's natural about having to wear a wig and tons of eye makeup to try and get people to treat you like a woman.
Okay, so you understand that the statement, being trans is natural, despite there being a need for a lot of people to do things that would be considered, quote, unnatural, doesn't mean that being trans isn't natural. Did you know that being a woman is natural? But there are plenty of people who feel the need to wear eyeshadow and makeup and get surgeries in order to affirm that? Like, how is this even? This isn't even an actual argument. This is an argument against women wearing makeup at this point. That doesn't accomplish anything.
Administration and transphobes would love to have you believe that being trans is unnatural, but species that can transition sexes can be found on every continent and in every ocean on planet Earth.
That had to be the most disingenuous analogy that I've ever heard. Show me a human male that's become female spontaneously without spending like $100,000 in the operating room. Well, even the surgeries don't change their biology, and just because certain animals can do things doesn't mean that humans can do those things.
Okay, what's with the random imagery in the background? Like, yes, I'm talking about being a transphobe. Would you like to see this picture of an Oriental structure? I don't know what it has to do with my transphobia, but it's here. Yeah, this is like, I didn't even want to go find B-roll. So I'm doing this. But okay, so here's the thing. The statement, being trans is natural, being backed up in the way that this person is having to do, makes perfect sense. Because when somebody says being trans is unnatural, it's a disingenuous statement. It's a leading question. The only ways for you to answer it are going to end up feeling just as disingenuous. When you point out that being trans, i.e. having the marker in your brain that says, well, my gender is not the one that I'm supposed to have, whenever you point that out, somebody is going to go, okay, well, you needed surgery in order to make that work out for you, so that's unnatural. Despite the fact that the marker is what made you trans. You were trans because your gender did not align with what you were assigned at birth. That's what made you trans. It wasn't the surgeries, it wasn't the medication, it wasn't any of that. It was just you being yourself. That's what made you trans. However, there are people that are going to use whether or not a person is trans. They're going to use that as their argument, and they're going to use the marker for their argument They're going to make sure that marker is going to be something like, oh, well, you had to have a surgery. Oh, well, you had to have medication. People have to have medication for chronic conditions all the time. And I think if we look at being trans as a kind of chronic condition, maybe that's language they would understand. Like, somebody has diabetes, and in order to survive, they need to take insulin. They have a chronic condition. They have a condition that's going to last their entire life, and there's a medication they need to survive. And for a lot of trans folks, it's really no different. The way for their brain to feel correct is by them having access to certain medications. I don't see a problem with that. I don't see the reason why we have a special set of circumstances that we look for when it's a trans person. It's no different than any other medical issue at that point, if you're looking at it just from a medical lens, which isn't necessarily the most accurate way to look at it. But if you were to follow just it being a medical thing, then there's certain things we would do, like treat it, and it would be fine. And you know how you treat being trans? It's easy. It's simple. It's like the easiest thing in the world. You let the person transition. There you go. Treatment found. We did it, everybody. We did it, Reddit.
Some animals aren't sexually dimorphic, and the females are just as strong as the males. That's not humans, though. There are a lot of differences between the sexes. I mean, I don't think I've seen an analogy this bad since the croissant analogy.
If trans women aren't women, then is this big croissant not a croissant? Of course it's a croissant. It's made out of butter and dough just like any other croissant.
Right, a big croissant and a small croissant are still both croissants. Except that's not what's happening here. You're not a big croissant saying that you're a small one. You're a taco saying, I identify as a pastry.
So before I demolish...
That's not what's really happening here. So, again, this is what happens when you're not looking at the context for why somebody is saying something. So the croissant analogy happens because one of the arguments against trans women being women are the physical traits they have. In fact, you used it in your own argument. But if we're to look at those physical traits, things that make them bigger, have broader shoulders, what have you, and we use those as our arguments that trans women aren't women, then, yeah, they're going to do something like grab a fucking piece of bread and say, is this not a piece of bread? Despite there being another piece of bread that looks really identical to it and tastes the fucking same. There's just more of it. Of course somebody's going to lean on that when they're responding to people fighting their identity in just a really, really bad, disingenuous way.
This delicious and very valid...
Also, just another thing. I don't care. Like, I truly and honestly don't care how badly a trans person justifies their existence. Because I don't think that human beings were programmed to have to justify their existences to everybody around them. I don't think people, by and large, end up being happier and more fulfilled people if every second of every day they are having to justify their existence. So even if somebody grasps at a straw to justify their existence, and that straw isn't the greatest of straws when they do so, I don't see that as a reason to say that they're not valid. You're just finding somebody who didn't describe something in a way that you agree with and using that as your argument. Like if somebody says it's okay to be black, and the argument they give is one of the worst arguments of all time. Insert whatever bad argument you can think of right now for somebody saying it's okay to be black. You don't then get to say, see, being black is invalid because this black person made such a bad argument. That's fucking stupid. It's disingenuous. If you want to figure out if trans people are valid, you look at the studies. You look at the studies that have been done on trans people as a phenomenon. You look at the ways that people have socially identified with their gender, the ways that people have operated for hundreds of years, technically thousands. You look at that. You look at data. But people like Think Before You Sleep, at least based on the vibe I'm getting from this video, don't want to look at that data. At least looking at that data requires them to do actual research. It's way easier for them to find somebody who's low common denominator and argue against them, and then say something like, oh, I don't know, is this the best they can come up with? As if those people are a monolith to begin with.
Pastry, repeat after me. Big croissants don't affect me in the slightest.
Yeah, that's not the case. In fact, that's exactly everyone's problem and why people have so much energy against transactivism.
Wait. How does transactivism affect you? Like, in any way? Just out of curiosity, how are you affected by transactivism? Generally speaking, no. That music was really loud. Generally speaking, no. People are not affected by transactivism. They feel like they're affected. They feel like it's something that matters. But the reality is, it doesn't really affect them all that much. Oh no, you had to fight against somebody being able to have time in the bathroom. You didn't know if there was a trans person in the bathroom, and when you pointed out there was one in the bathroom, you were wrong, and it was a fucking Walmart employee who then got fired as a result. Done a video on that. That's what you usually find when somebody argues against transactivism and says, well, it really does affect me. It doesn't, though.
We were all just out here minding our own business, and then a bunch of activists started inserting themselves into everything and saying, you have to treat us how we demand you treat us, or you lose your job. This sort of extortionist behavior is why people are mad at the LGBT crowd.
Okay, so I can understand where you're coming from. But here's the thing. If I'm going to a place of business, if I want to feel like I can frequent a place of business, and I want that place of business to be worthy of my business, effectively, and if that place of business makes me feel unwelcome or makes me feel unsafe, in any other scenario, we would argue in favor of the customer. Why would somebody who owns a business want you to feel unsafe or unwelcome at that business? Why would they want that? That would be so wild, right? That would be so stupid. If you're upset about somebody demanding things, then be willing to articulate what the demands are. And then we can have a conversation about whether or not those demands are worthwhile. I'm just going to go ahead and say, from my experience, the biggest demand most trans people have is, please use my name. Please use the name that I want to be called. And it's not the hardest thing to do. Generally speaking, you don't even know somebody's name until they've told it to you in the first place. What are you going to do? Go look up their fucking dead name? Just to use it? Like, that sounds really stupid. Who would do that? And if the argument's going to be about their gender specifically, oh, they made me use the gender that they identified as, who cares? How much time did it take out of your day? How much did you have to suffer to use their gender that they wanted you to use? How difficult was that? How much mental energy did it take for you to say ma'am when they asked? Generally speaking, it isn't that difficult. It doesn't take that much. It's not the hardest thing in the world. Transphobes are some of the whiniest bitches when they are inconvenienced even in the slightest. It's crazy.
Actually non-binary and use they them pronouns. I definitely could see that. In the best way possible, you look like you'd be non-binary. Slay, they. You realize that isn't a compliment, right?
I guarantee you that when people say that, 99% of the time it's not meant to be a compliment. And that's because as soon as you see the wacky hair color and the nose ring, oh wait, this person actually doesn't have a nose ring. Shocking. But when regular people see the wacky outfits, they know they're about to deal with a very difficult or annoying person. Or a narcissist. I mean, there are just so many examples of people with...
So somebody dresses in a way that's not considered, quote, normal, and now you're dealing with a narcissist? How is that a good indicator of that? What if somebody just has a wacky sense of style? Who cares?
narcissistic personality disorder, being gassed up by every major corporation for identifying as LGBT, and everyone hates stuff like this. From Today USA.
Who's everyone? Just out of curiosity, who's everyone? Like, you're speaking that everybody hates rainbow capitalism, and trust me, a lot of us are not a big fan of rainbow capitalism. At best, rainbow capitalism is an indicator that society is moving in a better direction. But it is not, in and of itself, a good thing. It's a morally neutral thing that can be viewed as good. Because at the end of the day, it's better to have a society that accepts you. And the best indicator for whether a society accepts you in a capitalistic society is whether the businesses accept you. Because they're the ones who are providing the jobs, they're the ones who are providing the paychecks, they're the ones who are conscripting the labor. If the workforce, which is most people, are trying to get your business, then there are at least enough of you to matter. That doesn't mean it's a good thing. It's not a good thing that corporations have that much power.
Say, women want to be her, men want to be with her. Dylan Mulvaney, the true definition of beauty and grace. Bro, Dylan Mulvaney doesn't even want to be Dylan Mulvaney. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of trans people out there who just want to mind their own business.
So that's not really an argument, and it's not even an argument against anything. Dylan Mulvaney doesn't want to be Dylan Mulvaney. All right, I'm super happy that you managed to get your humor right out of a fucking Family Guy cutaway gag. Like, can you? I'm just imagining that right now. Peter's sitting in there, sitting in the kitchen. Lois is sitting there. Peter, what about Dylan Mulvaney? Lois, not even Dylan Mulvaney wants to be Dylan Mulvaney. And then there'll be a 3-second cutaway gag of like Dylan Mulvaney looking at a not a window, a freaking mirror, and then crying, and then that's it. Like that's just a fucking back-asswards Family Guy joke. And I like Family Guy, so I'm just looking at that going, I don't know if I'd even find that funny, generally speaking. Okay, definitely workshop the jokes. I'm not seeing anything with that particular joke that strikes me as good humor. And not because I want to defend Dylan Mulvaney. Like, if I were to argue against it, I would say, if I were to actually argue against that, here, let me do a better job for you.
This is exactly what I'm talking about.
Women want to be her. No, not everybody wants to be completely fucking crucified for being on a beer bottle. But that's the life Dylan Mulvaney has. Men want to be with her. Some men don't want to be with the woman who probably has a penis. That's just, some men don't want that. And there, I've produced a better argument that is more cogent and actually has a point. Sure, it was less funny, but my point is not to be funny on the internet. My point is to be correct.
About. Now, I'm sure there are plenty of trans people out there who just want to mind their own business and go on with their lives. In fact, the right to be able to mind their own business was originally what the LGBT movement was pushing for.
No, it wasn't the right to mind their own business. The LGBT movement, as we understand it right now, the one that began with Stonewall, began as a goddamn riot. It began loud and proud. Because, here's the thing. Being able to be quiet and mind your own business is the bare minimum. But people are allowed to be out and proud about who they are, no matter what their identity is. That should be the standard that we are advocating for. That should be the standard we're looking for. Not, can everybody put their heads down and conform to society? That's not the thing we should be fighting for. For every trans person that doesn't want to make their existence a burden on others, congratulations, you're autistic.
And I think that's an idea that most Americans these days would have no problem supporting. However, the activists, not the normie LGBT people, I'm specifically talking about the activist part of
What the fuck is the normie LGBT people versus the activists? Do you know what happens when you make... also, Mephron, thank you very much for the 100 bits. Says out and proud. Thank you. You know what's funny? You know how you make an activist? You create an environment where people feel like they don't get to survive, where people feel like they can't marry who they want to marry, when people feel like they don't have access to the medications that they want. You create activists that way. The only difference between a normie and an activist is whether they are activated. In terms of them being people, there's no difference. I don't like this language of shaming activists because they're willing to fight for their rights. Honestly, people who are willing to fight for their rights are hella fucking cool. They're way cooler than the people who just sit there and pretend that everything is gonna be okay. So those who conform to respectability politics, so privileged queers, yup.
This community constantly display the most self-centered and entitled behavior, and it's not transphobic or bigoted to point out when someone's being a self-absorbed asshole.
I can agree with that. Now, what example are you going to show?
Let's go back to that image. Women want to be here. Yeah, except for all the women who were pissed off at Dylan's woman face behavior. In fact, people were...
Woman face. Woman face. All right. So that term doesn't make any fucking sense. Wanna know why? The term blackface doesn't exist in a vacuum. The term blackface exists because there were white performers who would take away opportunities from black people by wearing the blackface makeup and then make fun of them and create stereotypes about black people and how they were really fucking stupid. Blackface became an insult not only for what it represented, but for the actual economic opportunities that were taken away from people as a result of its usage. There are no economic opportunities taken away from women by trans people existing. So saying woman face doesn't make any goddamn sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. Because that term has a historical meaning. And none of that historical meaning is met by Dylan Mulvaney being here. The biggest problem people have with Dylan Mulvaney is that she's annoying and famous. That's it. They find her annoying. I find her annoying. And they're angry that she's famous. I'm not angry that she's famous. I don't give a shit, but I do find her annoying. But I'm not going to sit here and make a whole fucking hit piece about it, because somebody being annoying doesn't warrant that.
So mad at Dylan that Anheuser-Busch almost had to give up the Bud Light brand. Men want to be with her. No,
Did Anheuser-Busch almost had to give up the Bud Light brand? I don't think that's accurate. Hold on.
that Anheuser-Busch almost had to give up.
They didn't. That's not what that means. Oh no, it costed them an amount of money in sales. That didn't mean they had to give up a brand. That's an exaggeration based on you reading a fucking title.
The Bud Light brand. Man.
You're doing the equivalent of somebody's stupid aunt who just reposts Facebook news articles without actually reading the article itself.
Men want to be with her. No, they don't. Straight men don't. The second they find out you're trans, you're gonna get ghosted.
No, not really. So I can say from experience, as somebody who is straight, who developed a crush on my girlfriend, and then afterwards found out she was trans, and then afterwards had to have a long heart-to-heart about what that means, and how I'm gonna operate, and how uncomfortable I was with certain aspects of that. Down the line, I've been in that relationship for 2 years. And basically every fear that I had, every worry that I had, all of those got swept under the rug. Yeah, people can have hang-ups. But I promise you, if somebody finds you attractive, if they find out you're trans afterwards, then that's entirely on them. You don't have to be attracted to trans women. But if you find somebody attractive and then find out they're trans afterwards, my advice to you would be, It's time to experiment. It's time to go see if this is something that is worth investing your time in. You may find out that there are some things that you enjoy that you had no idea about, but now that you're with a trans person, you're going to have to figure those things out.
This video is for straight men and straight men only. I'm sorry, but how in the world could you not like me?
Okay, so again, this is a trans woman, and I'm just going to put her over here. This is a trans woman, and I will say...
Yes, I'm a trans woman, I'm a doll. Like, what is so different about dating me than a cis woman?
Like, she is goddamn hot. I don't see what the problem is saying that. Like, this is a woman who is just hot. And?
She can do everything that she can.
Except have children.
Okay, but not everybody gets in a relationship to have kids. Also, real quick thing, by that logic, if a cis woman who were just infertile were in that seat saying the same things, your statement would be equally valid, but it would be arguing against something completely different. And when that's the case, then your statement doesn't actually have any merit. Not all cis women can have children. Not all cis women want to have children. And on top of that, you might find that you're a cis woman who thinks she can have kids, and then you get in a relationship and realize you can't for a variety of reasons. In which case, your options are adopt. And if your options are adopt, congratulations, you have the same options as a trans woman. Congrats, I guess.
Did you notice the narcissistic, I'm so great behavior?
I mean, what was narcissistic about that? If somebody says somebody just says they look good. I don't think I look attractive. There are people who think I look attractive. I think they're wrong. But I don't think finding yourself attractive is narcissistic. I think having an obsession with yourself, thinking that you could never be wrong, those are narcissistic behaviors. But simply thinking that you're an attractive person, that's not a narcissistic behavior.
That's why people don't like you. The guy I was on a date with just found out that I was trans. Why is he just finding out on the date? Why was...
Because it's none of his business till then? Like, whether or not you're trans is none of the other person's business until the moment where you guys decide that you're going to do the hanky-panky. And if that's what you decide, then you have that conversation then. Hey, I have different plumbing down there than you're used to. Like, that shouldn't have to be a thing you disclose every time. Again, if the person finds you attractive, they're gonna find you attractive. I don't see the issue here. I really don't. The dude comes off to me as a narcissist trying to say others are, or I am being petty here.
Wasn't this disclosed on the dating app? I mean, they were definitely using a dating app where photos can be edited and the voice chat wasn't used. Why is it so hard to date?
And the voice chat wasn't used? You know that there are plenty of trans women who have passing voices, right? Also, Ravi, thank you for redeeming your points for an owl. But there are plenty of trans women who have passing voices. What do you say about that? I am dating a trans woman who has a passing voice. I know this because my conservative family has never once said jack shit about her being trans. And when I mentioned to my own mother, who lives right next to us, mind you, that there was a chance we would have to flee the country because of the anti-trans legislation that was being levied out by Donald Trump, the first words out of her mouth were, how does that affect you? Like, how does that affect you guys? Yeah, but don't worry, conservatives can always tell. They can always tell. So, I don't know where the hell this person's coming from.
Straight men when you're just a normal trans girl who makes content for the internet. Well, there you go. Stop catfishing people, and maybe you'll find someone who actually likes you.
It's not catfishing someone. There was a guy who was interested in women, and you are a woman. Person was not catfished. I don't see the problem. Catfishing is when you argue that you're something you're not, but trans women are women, so I don't see the problem here. It's catfishing if you have a drag queen there. Most drag queens are not trans. A lot of them are just men. You get that person who uses the pictures of themselves in drag on their dating app and then doesn't disclose that they are in fact a guy? Yeah, sure, that's a problem. That's catfishing. That's not what this is, though. That is a woman on a dating app. That's all that is.
I mean, it's crazy how many trans people think it's perfectly fine to start a relationship out by lying by omission.
What are you even really disclosing? What is there to disclose? There's no deception. When you're dating someone, you don't have to disclose every single thing about yourself.
Yeah, that's not a lie by omission. Only the most controlling, idiotic motherfuckers consider stuff like this a lie of omission. Are you a woman? Yes. Okay, cool. Out of curiosity, what happens when it's an intersex woman? What happens when there's a woman who has both sets of plumbing down there, but as a result, isn't able to bear kids, because most people who are intersex have trouble with that? Do they have to disclose that? Do they have to give that private information out to somebody who might have a knee-jerk reaction of just calling them a freak? Is that a thing they should subject themselves to? Simply for your convenience? Surely if you find somebody attractive from the waist down, or from the head down, you're gonna end up being okay with the waist down later. Also, progress only, thank you so much for the raid. Yeah, you shouldn't have to be like, oh, by the way, I've got a cock in the middle of the goddamn Applebee's. That's definitely a conversation to have in front of the family of 4 that's sitting in the booth next to you.
Up front. That's the fun of it. You get to learn about someone new.
Considering that the status of your sexuality is a big deal for a relationship, that definitely should be disclosed before you even go on a date.
Did you know that being trans is not a sexuality? I'm sure what you mean is sex, but you're so fucking stupid you can't actually use the correct words. You know that family wanted the tea, though? Yeah, probably. Maybe not the 10-year-old, though.
Though in this case, I actually wouldn't worry because I don't think anyone's being fooled by you.
He shows off his results of facial feminization surgery. What is your reaction? Again, just reading the tweets. Don't get mad at me. Let's take a look at this. Bro, I'm gonna keep it a bug. You gotta go back and ask for a refund. Like, this was not a complete job. This is just incomplete homework.
Though to be honest, some
What is that clip even supposed to show? Oh, somebody had facial feminization surgery and it didn't make them pass as much? And who cares? That's their body. If they are comfortable with that, then woo. Also, you're basically saying that women who have strong jawlines aren't women. That's effectively what you're saying there. Or you're just saying they don't look like women. And to that I say, who the fuck cares? There are women who have PCOS and as a result have facial hair. I can say it's unattractive. I personally find facial hair incredibly unattractive. But it doesn't make it a not natural thing that fucking happens sometimes.
trans people are more feminine than others, and it's harder for normies to tell. So in the case where someone is intentionally tricked and any form of sexual contact happens that they would otherwise not consent to, I think that should be considered sexual assault.
So, let me get this straight. You get in a relationship with a trans woman. After a couple months, you decide that it's time to do the hanky-panky. In these 2 months, you haven't found out they're trans. You get ready to do stuff. You take off her pants. and you find a cock there, just a big old girl cock. You know what happens when you live in a world where you get to call that sexual assault? I can tell you what happens. Pretty simple here. Let's go ahead. Just real quick, and talk about the trans panic defense. The LGBTQ plus panic defense is a legal strategy where defendants are charged with violent crimes and then weaponize their victims' real or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity or expression in order to reduce or evade criminal liability. So when you argue stuff like this, think before you sleep, you're basically arguing in favor of actual physical assault. Because what happens with that defense, historically, is somebody will attack the trans person, many times beating them mercilessly, sometimes within an inch of their life, and then they will rely on this panic defense. When they use the panic defense, they argue that their violent actions are both explained and excused by their victim's real or perceived sexual orientation or gender identity or expression. The goal of this strategy is to employ homophobia or transphobia to persuade the jury into fully or partially acquitting a defendant. Whether or not this appeal to bigotry is successful in court, every time a defendant invokes the panic defense, they reinforce the dangerous and discredited belief that LGBTQ lives are worth less than others. Matthew Shepard's murder trial is one of the most recognized cases featuring the LGBTQ plus panic defense. In 1998, two men brutally beat a 21-year-old college student and left them to die on a roadside in Laramie, Wyoming. At trial, the defendants attempted to use the LGBTQ plus panic defense to excuse their actions. While they were unsuccessful, the employment of the defense further harmed the memory of Matthew Shepard by blaming him for his own brutal murder. Today, the defense is still employed in courtrooms across the country. So, yeah, you can say, oh, well, I think when somebody's in this situation, they should basically be able to say, I was raped. No, if you consented to a sexual experience with a person, regardless of what plumbing is down there, you are allowed to revoke consent at any point during that engagement. If you continue to consent to things in that engagement while you are there, or not revoke consent while you are there, you should not be able to mount a defense against somebody. The precedent that sets for other people is astoundingly dangerous, because you effectively create a world where people get to be engaged in what both parties assumedly believe are consensual operations, and then a day later, if the person regretted doing it, they can say, oh, well, I was raped, which is something that I have seen fucking happen. And it is scary as shit when somebody does that. You're saying consent is actually a well thought out concept? Yeah, imagine that. Senna says, so I get to beat up a guy if I find out he has a small penis? Yeah, a guy says he's got a large penis, he's packing heat, and then you get in a relationship and you find out he's got an itty-bitty 2.5 incher? I guess you should be able to beat the shit out of him, because that's not what you were expecting down there. You were expecting a different kind of plumbing, technically speaking. Neat.
These people are all about consent, right? Well, you can't consent if you don't understand the terms of the deal, and if you're trying to trick someone into consenting to something they otherwise would not consent to if they had full knowledge of the terms, then that is very much the mentality of a rapist. You aren't fool-
No, it's not. It's the mentality of somebody who's been shunned a billion times. It's the mentality of somebody who doesn't think it's any of your business until the moment of. What somebody has between their legs isn't your business until the moment where you two have decided that you're going to do something. And because consent is something that can be revoked at any point, it should be perfectly acceptable for somebody to open up that girl's pants, see a penis there, decide that's not what they're in for, and say, have a good night. We'll talk about this in the morning. That should be an okay thing to happen. Because this concept that he's arguing for only works in a world where consent is given only at the beginning of an encounter and never had the opportunity to be revoked.
Fooling anyone. Everyone knows that you aren't disclosing this information right away for a reason. And really, the best way to continue to take power away from these people so they can't threaten us anymore is to just start calling stuff what it is.
Wait, threaten you? How are you threatened by a trans woman existing? What kind of weak, limp-dicked behavior is this? What kind of pathetic behavior is that? My God, what an actual clown. Oh no, I'm so threatened by trans people existing. Oh, I gotta call them wapists even when they didn't do any waping. Oh, my God, you are pathetic. Jesus Christ, I'm not spending any more time on you. I have spent 40 minutes of my life playing hopscotch in Scarlet Monastery while we wait for my fucking DPS to get here? They are in Hillsbrad Foothills. I have been spending this whole time listening to your drivel. This is the saddest, most pathetic shit I have heard in the last 24 hours. And I live in Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. I hear some pretty sad shit when I go to the fucking taco bar. They make me feel weird in my pants. That scares me. Jesus Christ, what a pathetic human being. You are so sad. Jesus Christ, go seek therapy. You obviously need it. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie Chan, Kiri Artemis, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Leela Ururaka, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it just a little bit.